Hello, good evening, everybody. So tonight I've got the topic of breast cancer prevention and some tips for survival as well. And because there's a lot of information to cover, figured to get started just a little earlier than usual. So welcome to those of you who are finding me just a little bit earlier than usual tonight. So first of all, I want to go over some information just in general about breast cancer, and we're going to do a couple of different presentations based on a few different resource articles. So by way of introduction, over 250,000 women in the United States are diagnosed with breast cancer every year. But not all women have the same risk of developing that over the course of a lifetime. And there are certain things that women can do that will either increase the risk or decrease the risk of developing breast cancer. And so it's very important that people get a sense of what are the kinds of things that are in your control that you can modify that will help prevent this disabling disease as well. Breast cancer is the most common cancer among women, besides skin cancer, which is very common in general. And so Dr. Greger mentions how researchers followed 30,000 women without any history of breast cancer and found that simply a couple of little things, such as limiting alcohol intake. Alcohol has been linked with, I think, about 14 different kinds of cancers, and breast cancer is indeed one of the types of cancers it's associated with. Eating mostly plant foods and maintaining a normal body weight was reduced with, drumroll please, 62% lower breast cancer risk. All of those things are very easy to achieve, and also a few other things as well. So eating a plant-based diet along with some sort of exercise, even simply walking every day, improves the cancer defenses within just a couple of weeks. 2 weeks specifically is what was mentioned on Greger's thing. And there's a lot of different reasons why these simple lifestyle measures can be helpful. For example, on several of the articles mentions this cancer-promoting growth hormone named IGF-1. So this is something that is a common theme amongst a lot of the different mechanisms of disease. So not just breast cancer, but also a few other conditions as well. And this is a hormone that your body makes more of when certain foods are consumed. So for example, if you have a lot of animal protein, then the body makes more of it, and then it goes off and it causes more trouble. So it's not just the animal protein that is linked with increased rates, but also there's a lot of carcinogens in cooked meat. Even the folks that are working in restaurants and inhaling some of the fumes coming off of, for example, a frying surface where meat is cooked at a high temperature, the fumes and the smoke and everything coming off of those types of things do get in the body, and also, kind of like cigarettes, raise the risk for cancers in general. More of that, of course, on Dr. Greger's nutritionfacts.org. So there was one study called the Long Island Breast Cancer Study Project. It was reporting that the women who ate more grilled, barbecued, and smoked meats over the course of the entire lifetime, as much as 47% higher cancer odds for breast cancer. And the Women's Health Study in Iowa also found that the women who really ate their bacon, their beef, and their burgers very well done, in other words, more of this, the carcinogens that are released when the meats are cooked at high temperatures, had 5 times the odds of getting breast cancer compared to even the women that still ate the meat, but instead of having it really well done, ate it rare or medium. And so basically the scientists were able to link the consumption of the fried meats and the highly charred types of meats with the amount of DNA damage that was found within the breast tissue, and thus offering a potential link for why the mechanism, why is it that these particular foods were particularly troublesome to the body's defenses. And so when DNA is damaged, that is one of the things that the body has to continuously fight against, because if just the right gene is essentially knocked out or hurt or so, then basically the body's not as able to suppress those cancer genes as it was before. So more on that probably in a future easy presentation. So there's also a link between cholesterol and the progression of breast cancer, as the cancer seems to essentially feed on the cholesterol. So the cholesterol is something that the body normally uses as part of the way that it makes sex hormones. So it's basically like fuel for the body to create these hormones. And one of the things that sometimes happens with these cancers is some of them go ahead and create a whole bunch of hormones of their own. So basically the theory is, why is the cholesterol feeding the cancer or getting used up by the cancer, is that it's using it to make more estrogen or to shore up the membranes of the tumor that make it easier for the cancer to go out to other locations. And so there's some studies that show that the tumors might be making some advantage of it to fuel and accelerate their own growth as well. So generally speaking, more fruits, more vegetables, more fiber, as well as specific foods that are especially protective, like flax seeds, I've mentioned in other videos, soy foods, and cruciferous vegetables, especially foods like broccoli and broccoli sprouts. Those also help to reduce the risk and improve survival chances. So Dr. Vera has a wonderful series of presentations on more details about different aspects of breast cancer. And just to segue into that a little bit, talking about survival. So again, about 1 in every 8 women is diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. So that's a lot of women. And as mentioned before, there's a lot of different kinds of things that can be done to help prevent this. So one of the things they were looking at was, all right, let's come up with a list of just a few boxes to try to check off. So they've got 4 boxes. So avoiding tobacco, and tobacco is cancerous causing in so many different ways. People oftentimes think that it just causes lung cancer. Nope. It causes lung cancer, skin cancer, bladder cancer, enhanced cancer of the mouth, esophagus, all these kinds of different body locations, not just where you're holding on to the cigarette and letting it contact mucous membranes, but also the rest of the body in general. So staying away from tobacco. If you haven't gotten away from tobacco yet, highly recommend it. Avoiding alcohol, as mentioned before. So alcohol not only plays a role in breast cancer, but also certain types of alcohol, beer, for example, has the same type of hormone effect on the body as does other sources of that estrogen. So too much estrogen or things that act like estrogen on the body will also raise the risk of breast cancer as well. So avoiding tobacco, avoiding alcohol, daily exercise, so getting out, moving, taking a walk, doing something is better than being a couch potato. And plant-based diet, those women that did all 4 of those things cut their breast cancer odds by 80%. That's pretty significant odds in my book. All right, so, and then the women that were already diagnosed with breast cancer and followed that 4-point system, basically their odds of survival quadrupled. So in other words, much higher survival rates. And so other things reduce the breast cancer risk by up to 60%. So for example, removing the ovaries, taking a drug called tamoxifen for those that are at high risk. But the trouble is that there can be some significant side effects of that. You take the ovaries out, boom, you're off, basically in menopause immediately, surgical menopause we call it, not very fun. And Also, some of the medications can sometimes raise the risk of uterine cancer, blood clots, and so forth. So that's one of the other reasons why I love these strategies of doing what you can to help prevent the cancer in the first place, such as lots of fiber, flax, soy, and especially broccoli or other cruciferous vegetables, though broccoli was the main one that was tested. And decreasing cholesterol levels. So if you practice a whole food plant-based diet, the cholesterol levels plummet, and also avoiding animal in general and alcohol in general is also a very good thing to do. So there are actually, we talked about the cancer feeding on cholesterol, so basically some of those transformed cancerous cells, like a sponge, they kind of soak up that LDL, and again, that was shown to help stimulate the growth of the breast cancer cells. And there are certain breast cancer tumors that have higher levels of those LDL receptors. In other words, it's just sitting there waiting for some LDL to come along, and it grabs it and it takes it in and uses it. So if you've got more receptors that are sitting there waiting for that bad cholesterol to go along, then those are basically tumors that are more likely to be stimulated by that cholesterol. There was some research that found that breast cancer risk was reduced when people ate more sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds. Now, big difference between sunflower and pumpkin seeds versus like sunflower oil. So again, try to use the whole food as much as possible, just as a general thing. And why is that? Well, one of the theories is that that might be associated with the phytosterol. So basically, it's a type of chemical component that's in that sunflower seed, and that helps to reduce the cholesterol levels in the blood. So mentioning the link between alcohol and breast cancer survival. So even just a little bit of alcohol increases the risk for cancers in general, as mentioned before. And there was something in the Harvard Women's Health Study that was saying, wait a second, if you have moderate red wine consumption, there was not so much risk, almost no increased risk for moderate consumption of red wine. And so what they were suggesting was that the grape skin that's in the red wine, but not in the white wine, there's some phytochemicals in there that basically suppress an enzyme that the breast tumors are using to make their own estrogen. So essentially, estrogen fuels breast tumor growth, which is one of the reasons why changing, for example, weight, being obese or overweight, the extra fat cells create all this extra estrogen. And so that's one of the reasons why obesity in general is associated with higher breast cancer risk in particular. And so this red grape skin was shown to suppress this particular enzyme. It's called aromatase. The name of it doesn't really matter, but it's just something that the breast cancer cells use to make their own estrogen. So in other words, they're trying to make their own rocket fuel, so to say, and stimulate their own growth from it. And so the idea is to get the benefit of the that grape skin without the liability of the downsides of taking in the alcohol that goes along with it. Again, just very easy whole food plant-based diet pattern. Just eat a few red grapes and avoid the alcohol. Apparently the seeded grapes are especially rich in this thing. So another on breast cancer survival with methionine. So what's up with methionine? This is a particular amino acid. So you guys might have heard about people talking about beans and rice and all these different combinations of plant foods, and there's an old myth that said you had to eat these things at the same meal because it's not a complete protein and so forth. So Pretty much anything that's alive and has cells should have enough building blocks or amino acids to be able to sustain that life. And the difference between plants and animals, one of the main differences in when you're eating them is the types of amino acids that are more prevalent in one source than the other. So we really don't need very much methionine. It's a particular amino acid. So if you broke down some protein and said, okay, I've got these, is it 30 something different amino acids? Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them out there, and there's a that methionine. One of the strategies for using food to help in the fight against cancers in general, not the only treatment, but as an adjunct to everything else. One of the theories is that if you starve the body and the tumor of methionine, then the growth of those tumors gets stifled. And so foods that are especially high in methionine, like meat, especially chicken and fish, eggs and dairy, those are very high in methionine, which is kind of like pouring oil on the fire and can help tumors grow. So that's a really big area of research these days. There's a lot of, as I mentioned in other presentations, a lot of backlash against soy in general, and there's still a kind of a persistent, I've had several patients come back and tell me that their oncologist specifically told them to avoid soy. And so as I bring this up, I do recommend that you go to the original source of this, and you'll see in the comment section below, and use it as a point of basically discussion with your providers in general. But soy is a wonderful food for many reasons, and one of the reasons that is good in this sense is, again, we're talking about certain receptors that these cancers tend to have, and ways in which we can use foods to help either block or flush away from the body the things that are causing those receptors to essentially turn on and drive cancer growth. And so soy has a lot of what we call phytoestrogens. So it's not the same as an animal estrogen. It doesn't bind quite the same way to the receptor. It doesn't stimulate that receptor. It doesn't turn that receptor on in quite the same way that an animal estrogen, regardless of whether it's being made by us as the animal or whether it's being taken in from dairy or some other high estrogen source. So the phytoestrogens, as I've demonstrated in the menopause video, you might want to check that out too, is it doesn't quite bind as tightly as the animal estrogen does. And so because it doesn't quite bind as well, it doesn't turn on the that machinery that causes the breast cancer to grow. And in fact, it kind of blocks it, because now this receptor, it's kind of a little bit loosely occupied by that phytoestrogen. Well, now an actual estrogen comes along and the receptor's like, nope, I'm already taken. I'm already like partly bound to this other thing. And it's essentially turning off that pathway to some degree. Another thing that the soy does is, you might have heard of these genes called BRCA. We call them BRCA for short, 1 and 2. So those are some genes that, as kind of a collection of a hodgepodge of genes that are loosely associated with breast cancer risk. And the soy phytonutrients that were in there, when it was introduced to some breast cancer tumors, basically about a cup of soybeans in there, it was able to turn on the genes, basically ramping up the DNA repair. So basically, if women have mutations in their BRCA genes, these genes help repair the DNA. And so they're called tumor suppressors. And so if someone has kind of a mutated version of it, it's not as able to suppress cancer as previously. And the cancers actually are able to turn those genes off directly. And this is one of the really exciting things about some of the upcoming new research that's going on right now, is we're able to see in a snapshot basically how lifestyle changes are able to change how your genes are expressing in the moment, and essentially almost real time. It's pretty exciting work that they're doing these days. But anyway, they were found that about the equivalent of eating about a cup of soybeans, it was able to turn back on the cancer-suppressing genes that keep things such as breast cancer at bay. And so it was suggesting that the phytonutrients might reverse some of that, we use a big fancy word here, hypermethylation. So basically, when the breast cancer turns on, one of the things that happens is that basically starts changing the expression of other genes in there. And so the methyl groups basically are ways of turning things on and off in general as well. So anyway, so the idea is that the soy nutrients reverse the damage in part that and restores the expression of some of the cancer suppressing genes, BRCA1 and 2. Fascinating, good stuff. There's also some studies specifically with the broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli sprouts may be especially good, but even less than a single serving a day of broccoli kinds of things was able to cut the risk of cancer progression or recurrence by over half. And there's some really neat stuff I saw on Greger's website a few years ago talking about how even 2 cups of broccoli a week was enough to really boost breast cancer survival in those that had been diagnosed with it. So again, not a one-size-fits-all, only eat your broccoli and you'll be safe kind of thing. That's not the message I'm trying to get off. What I'm trying to get there is, why not eat a little bit of broccoli if there's even a chance that it's going to be helpful for you in the long haul. Fiber in breast cancer study. This is another big thing. So the women who had the highest amount of fiber in their diets had up to, again, another big number, 85% lower odds of getting breast cancer. So per every 20 grams of fiber that you eat a day, the breast cancer risk was 15% lower. And you might be like, wait, what on earth has fiber got to do with breast cancer? Well, remember that estrogen I mentioned a little while ago? It all ties back to that. So basically, when you eat the fiber, it binds up extra hormones. So the liver and all basically are trying to excrete all these extra hormones that we don't really need. And then further down the track, there are basically like little trash pickers, and they're like, oh wait, did you really want to get rid of that estrogen? We think we're going to take it back here. And those little pickers basically end up absorbing more estrogen if you don't have a boatload of fiber, because the body is essentially designed for having a lot of fiber just passing through the system at all times. If you look back at the poops of people that lived like 10,000 years ago, before a lot of our modern accoutrements and civilization, all that kind of stuff, well, that poop is very, very, very rich in fiber, suggesting that our Paleolithic ancestors actually ate a lot of plants. They don't move, you don't have to hunt them down, they're easy and you can find fruit. Anyway, so basically all that fiber binds up the extra hormones, and then you just flush it safely down the toilet. And so I'm sure there's a limit to that at some point, but basically the risk was 15% lower for every 20 grams of fiber that was consumed per day. And so in general, even if there's only 10 grams a day of increased fiber, it reduced the risk of breast cancer by about 7%. Finally, on this part of the presentation, there's a lot of studies on flax seeds in particular and breast cancer survival. So I've mentioned flax a few times before. To get the best of the lignans and such that are in there, I usually recommend that people buy the flax in the whole seed form and grind it up shortly before use, because some of those phytonutrients in there are very more delicate as well. So you want to do as much as possible fresh if you can. And so there were some really big studies in the US, Germany, and Italy, and they showed that the higher the lignin level, the lower the risk of breast cancer. And out of all the foods that are out there that are easy to find, the flaxseed is a very, very high concentration of these lignins, up to 800 times higher than about 12 other sources of plant foods, which are the only whole food sources of the lignins that are out there. And again, I do recommend eating the whole food version of these things rather than trying to rely on lignin-rich flaxseed oil, for example. Just because, for one thing, when you have it in your hand and you have the flax seeds, you know exactly what you're getting. With some of these oils, there's unfortunately sometimes some adulteration. They might substitute one oil with something that tastes similar or dilute it out with other things. And also, again, some of these fatty acids and things are very delicate and might not survive as good as they would in the original form. Plus, if you get the original flax seeds and grind them up, you're getting all the benefit of that extra fiber, which we just mentioned. The fiber alone is also very healthy for you. And, you know what you're eating. And it's probably a lot cheaper, too, in the long haul. So anyway, they had 3,000 women with breast cancer, and they had 3,000 women that did not have breast cancer. And they found that just plain old having the flax on a regular basis alone, and that also reduced the risk of breast cancer by about 20 to 30%. And then there was another one that showed that some women that already had the breast cancer and then took in some flax seeds, they found the tumor proliferation went down. So in other words, the risk of the tumors dividing and conquering and basically getting bigger, that tended to be lower. And then the death of the cancer cells itself tended to go up, and a particular score called the C-ERBB2 score, fancy way for one of the ways in which people measure how aggressive are these tumors. Well, that score tended to go down as well. And so the women that were in the flaxseed habit tended to have less metastases and tended to have less spread as well. So I'm going to stop this particular video at this point and come back with some more information about breast cancer screening and such in a moment. All right, so hope you've enjoyed this brief tour, and I'll be back soon. Okay, bye-bye.